Welcome to this course, Psych 101, Elements of Psychology. This is just to give you an introduction to what psychology is all about. And so this is just the first section of 11 lectures that I will be delivering to you. My name is Dr. Paul Naduku, a lecturer at the Department of Psychology, University of Ghana. Basically, in this first section, we will try to look at what psychology is all about, the definition of psychology. We'll look at the goals of psychology, what is non-psychology, and what really are the relevance of psychology in our everyday lives. It is my hope that at the end of this section, you will be able to fully understand the field of psychology, explain what pseudo-psychology are, and distinguish it from psychology, identify and evaluate some misconceptions about psychology, as well as explain the 4 goals of psychology, and finally appreciate the importance of psychology in everyday life. So look at 5 sections within this first lecture: the meaning and scope of psychology, misconceptions, pseudo-psychology, the 4 goals of psychology, and the relevance of psychology. The question to ask is, what is psychology? Psychology basically comes from 2 words, psych and logos. Psych means mind or the soul. Logos means the knowledge of or the study of. So if you put the 2 together, psychology in its earlier beginnings has been seen as the study of the mind, the study of the soul, or the knowledge of the mind or knowledge of the soul. But the fact is, the psychology as it stands today has grown beyond this definition. Psychology does not limit itself to the soul or the mind, but it looks at behavior and mental processes. So psychology today is seen as the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. The interest of psychology is about understanding human beings, but sometimes because we cannot subject human beings to certain experiments, psychologists sometimes look at animal behavior and animal mental processes as well. So later in the lecture series, we'll look at the reasons why animals are used and stuff like that. So any definition about psychology should have certain key terms stated there. 1 is that it's a science, 2, it deals with behavior, and then 3, it deals with mental processes. One may ask, what makes any discipline a science? Very simple. Any discipline that follows a systematic means of acquiring knowledge or studying what the discipline is about becomes a science. It is not the content of what the discipline does in that makes the subject a science, but rather the means by which they study what the subject is all about. So psychology is basically a science. Now let's look at some misconceptions about psychology. People think that psychology is about reading other people's mind. They think psychology is about magic and tricks. They think psychology is about fortune telling. That is soothsaying, being able to read certain features of the person's hand and facial looks and things like that to tell what the person will be. No, this is not what psychology is about. These are all misconceptions. Any psychology is a scientist and does not engage in these things. So we should take note of that. Now let's look at para and pseudo psychology. Parapsychology is another means by which we explain human behavior, which does not make use of any scientific means. The explanation of parapsychology goes beyond the normal means of communication that we know. What we should know is that psychology is not the only discipline that studies human behavior and mental process. There are so many other explanations. Religion also tries to explain human behavior and a whole lot, economics and a whole lot. But these 2 that we are coming to look at, come so close to what psychologists do, but there is a very vast difference between them. And the difference lies in the fact that both parapsychology and pseudopsychology does not make use of the scientific method. They do not involve a systematic way of explaining behavior. Parapsychology simply refers to explanations of human behavior that goes beyond psychology or goes beyond the mental human capabilities. And pseudopsychology is simply seen as a false psychology. So today we'll look at some of the some examples of pseudopsychology and some examples of parapsychology. Parapsychology goes beyond the 5 senses, and so some of the time we call it the psychology of extrasensory perceptions. Extrasensory perception is the unproven ability to communicate, gain knowledge, and information outside the use of the senses, or to cause things to happen using only the power of the mind. So extrasensory perceptions or parapsychology processes do not lead themselves to rigorous scientific test and verification. So some of them we'll be looking at today are what we call telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, and psychokinesis. Telepathy simply refers to what we sometimes term as thought transfer, that is being able to dive into other people's mind without the mediation of any known channel of communication. If you can sit here and read what I'm thinking about at this moment in time, then you are practicing telepathy. Science will not be able to explain that, and so does not fall within the purview of psychology. So that is about telepathy. Clairvoyance is another parapsychology, and this refers to the ability to see what is happening at a particular place at a certain time without having any prior knowledge of the events. So here it involves being able to see or give an account of an ongoing event at another place, or what is happening in another location, irrespective of the distance and the physical barrier. So if I'll be able to tell you as I stand here what is happening in my office, whether my head of department is knocking on my door looking for me and all that, then I am practicing clairvoyance. If I don't have any prior knowledge to that, then that is a clairvoyance, which psychology does not engage in. And then we have precognition, what in religion they refer to as prophecy, and that is the ability to accurately predict future events without any prior knowledge. If I can tell what will happen tomorrow without any basis, then that is precognition, and psychology is not concerned about precognition or about prophecy. And then finally, we have psychokinesis, which is another example of the parapsychology, and that involves the use of the mental energy to move objects. There are people who can just conjure objects to move from one place to the other. They can, just let water flow out of nothing, some sort of magics and things like that. We refer to them as psychokinesis. That's the ability of an individual to exert influence over animate and inanimate objects by the mental energy. These are all not within the purview of psychology. Now, pseudopsychology, as I said, is concerned with false psychology because it refers to unsubstantiated false or fake psychology. It basically involves practices which are given the resemblance of psychology, but which in the real sense they are not. So what they do is that basically they look at some features of a human being and then start to make some predictions about what the person will become and things like that. So they are just simply giving some manifestations of science, but they do not satisfy the scientific requirement, especially of a systematic study of things. So we have some few examples that we'll look at here: graphology, palmistry, and phrenology. Graphology simply refers to the belief that one's handwriting can reveal one's personality traits and could also be used to predict one's job performance. People think that by looking at people's handwriting, we can tell who is intelligent and who is not intelligent. This is not psychology. This is graphology. And then we have palmistry. People think that by looking at certain features of your palm, they will be able to tell your personality. So that is not psychology, it is palmistry. That's the claim and belief that the lines and the pattern that are in the individual's palm have something to do with their personality, and that the nature of the lines and the pattern could be used to predict one's future or destiny. This is not within science, it's not psychology. And then finally we have graphology, which is the belief that the bones and the shape of one's head will be able to determine one's level of intelligence, personality, and other individual characteristics. People believe that by looking at other people's skull, especially those that have a very long occipital and a very funny shape of the skull at their back, people think they are intelligent. And those that are very big head, people think they rather do not have any sharp brains at all. This is not psychology, this is phrenology. So these are some of the examples of the para and pseudo-psychology. And psychology as a scientific endeavor does not entertain these things, because there are serious problems with both para and pseudo-psychology. One is that both pseudo and parapsychology could lead to ready acceptance of chance events as evidence of paranormal activities. And then also the fact that paranormal activities cannot be examined by science. We cannot replicate what people engages in using the extra sensory perception. If somebody can stand here and tell me what is happening in my office at this moment in time, how will I be able to replicate this? How will I repeat this study and get the same thing? Others cannot do that. And then also, there seems to be no explanation, no sensible explanation for some of these paranormal activities. And then also, experience has taught us that people who engage in this parapsychology most of the time use these abilities to perpetrate fraud on others, and this is something that science is not about. Science is about objectivity and things like that. Now let's look at the goals of psychology. What do all psychologists aim to achieve? In psychology, we aim to achieve 4 key goals. One is that we want to describe behavior. 2, we want to explain it, and then we want to predict, and finally we want to control it. When we are talking about being able to describe behavior, then we are talking about being able to tell in details what exactly the person is engaging in, what the person is doing at the moment in time. If you mention depression, we should be able to explain what depression is all about, and we should be able to tell that depression symptoms are different from anxiety symptoms. If we can do that, then we have been able to achieve the goal of description. So that is one thing we want to do. We always want to tell what exactly is going on, describe behavior, and being able to distinguish one behavior from the other. And then the second goal is that we want to explain behavior. And here what we aim to achieve is why this behavior is taking place. We want to find out the factors that are behind this behavior. So that is the second goal that we aim to achieve. And then the third one is that we want to predict behavior. We want to tell when this behavior will occur. And this basically comes from the first 2 goals that we try to achieve. If we can describe behavior, if we can explain it, that is, if we can identify the causes or the factors that give rise to the behavior, then obviously we should be able to tell when the behavior will occur, because once we see those explanatory factors, we can tell that this and that will happen. So if you can tell that, if somebody should lose the mom, the dad, are the reasons why somebody experiences depression, then once somebody is falling into these traps, we know that very soon the person will be showing symptoms of depression. And then finally, as psychologists, we want to control behavior. we want to control behavior. And here, this control is talking about, changing behavior for a good reason. We want to modify or change behavior. We want to assist people to be able to overcome the challenges in life, whatever behavior they are going through. If it's adversely affecting them, we want to assist them to be able to live a more desirable life. So these are the goals that psychologists aim to achieve. But the fact is that it is not all psychologists that achieve all these goals. Depending on your area of specialization, you may be achieving all 4 goals, or you may not be achieving all of them. Now, the relevance of psychology. How important is this discipline to human beings? One is that a knowledge in psychology will enable each individual to understand him or herself better. You learn about the changes that takes place at which age and stuff like that. So you will be able to understand yourself better by the time you go through this course. And then understanding yourself better will also lead you to understand others better, because you'll be able to know how others can behave, what to expect from others once they fall into certain situations. And then psychology is one of the interesting disciplines where so many social issues that are often not discussed in our social lives will be discussed. If you talk about death, issues about death, most of the time society does not want to mention it, but in psychology these are issues that we embrace and we try to investigate. So many issues that are of importance to us will be dealt with when it comes to this course. And of course, the study of psychology will put the individual in a better position to evaluate conflicting claims. Psychology is a very critical and a logical discipline that once you engage in, your mind will be well developed. You'll be able to ask people questions once they make certain claims. You want to find out the reasons behind the things that they say. And then, of course, we can also have a discipline when we engage in psychology. There are so many areas. Later in the next sections, we'll be talking about some of the professions that we can engage in this psychology. So psychology is a very interesting discipline, and you'll be able to learn a whole lot. And so my charge to you is to keep calm and enjoy the discipline. Thank you.